Okay, great. So welcome to the College and Career Chat. So if you've joined me before, welcome back. If this is your first time, we're happy to have you. Sorry that November got a little wonky with the days. So happy Wednesday. Normally we hold these Thursday morning, but with all the days off and the breaks in November, it was a bit of a challenge. So I'm hoping to get back to Thursday mornings in December, and you'll have that schedule with the newsletter. So if you haven't joined us before, there's a Q&A box. So if you have any questions throughout this session, you feel free to put it in the Q&A box. I will be monitoring that as we go through. Today's session is regarding regular decision and how to help support your student through regular decision and what does regular decision look like. So we all know that there's early action and early decision, which we had touched upon in prior sessions. Most of those deadlines, most of them were either October 15th, November 1, or November 15th, which November 15th is right around the corner. And some of our students just are not ready to apply yet, and that's okay. There's regular decision is not late. There's a reason there's a regular decision pool. A lot of colleges take a lot of applicants from the regular decision pool. So that's one thing I want to, say here is regular decision is on time, just like every other. And not all of our students are ready to apply early, and that's okay. So I'm going to walk you through today the application process, which some of you may have heard, some of you may be parents of juniors, so this may be helpful to kind of start thinking about, and really how to support your students through that. So some of our students maybe don't have a list yet, and I'm hoping if they're a senior, they at least have a list where they know where they want to apply. If they feel like their list maybe isn't right, or they still need to make some tweaks, please have them visit their counselor. And if they're a junior or a sophomore, or even a freshman, they can begin to think about what colleges are on their list. So for our senior parents out there, our seniors should know by now where they want to apply. But like I said, if there needs to be tweaks made to that list, or they want to discuss something, they should go visit their counselor soon. So once you have a list down and you've researched the schools that, they want to apply to, then it's time to make the application. So most of our students here at Schreiber use the common application. There are a couple of schools out there that I know our students quite frequently apply to that are not on the common application. So that's something that you want to research prior to making a common application, just knowing which schools are going on there. So my suggestion is, I love spreadsheets, but spreadsheets are not for everyone, but have some way of organizing your list of schools, because you'll also need to figure out, are they on the common app? What are their requirements? And it's good to kind of lay it out and see, so that way nothing is missed. So like I said, I do that in the form of a spreadsheet where I would list all the schools, and then I would list all of, what application they are on, and then what their admissions requirements are. So for our senior students who are going through it right now, if they haven't made a common application already, they should. And the first step that I would say right now is filling out what I say is the easier part of the application, and really like the demographics. So like their name, their address, all of those things that are likely not going to change in the next couple of months. And then the biggest thing that I would say is their essay. So if students have not begun their essay yet, it's okay, they still have time, but they should definitely start thinking about which prompt they want to use. They should look at the schools they're applying to see if there's supplemental essay questions. So I know we talked about that last time. The supplement questions came up. Sometimes supplement questions will say that they are optional. we tell students that they're not really optional. They should be doing all the supplement questions as also the personal essay questions. Here at Schreiber, we do have a writing center. So it is open. There's a writing center website. It scrolls when they're open on all the TVs in the high school. So if students are looking for help with their essay, any type of writing help, please have your students visit the writing center. They're great. They're in there, and they really want to help students. That's why they have it. So it's a really great resource for our students. And then us counselors also. So we would love to kind of go through content with some students and just see, did they hit the mark? The one thing about the personal essay is, and that, how to support your student is some students have these really great stories and they get really, going on in their stories. And then before you know it, when you read it, it's not really about them anymore. It's about the story. So one thing I would caution, when maybe connecting with your student about the personal essay is just to make sure that the essay stays centered on them. They are the one that's being admitted to the school. So the college really wants to learn about them. And while the story may be really interesting and really cool, if it's not focused on your student, the admissions office isn't really going to gain any knowledge about your student. What I like to tell students is sometimes you'll know the admissions rep, sometimes you'll go to the school, sometimes you'll meet them, sometimes they'll come to Schreiber, but sometimes you're just going to apply, and the only way they're going to know you is based on this piece of paper. So you want to make sure that your student is giving their best foot forward, and that everything on that paper, even if it doesn't seem like the student should talk about themselves, is really about them to showcase who they are to the admissions office. So before we move on, are there any questions regarding, I just threw a lot of information at you. Is there any questions regarding like personal essay, creating a Common App, knowing dates and deadlines? Okay, so I'm going to continue to monitor the question box, but I'm going to move on. So the next thing on the application that students, if they are a senior, they definitely should start thinking about. If they are a junior, they should begin to think about is letter of recommendations. So the trend, so it's funny, I'm going to talk about the trend of letter of recommendations, and then there's also a question in the box about what's the trend towards standardized tests, and I will touch upon that. The trend towards letter of recommendations right now is not every college needs them. So this is where that organizational handy spreadsheet comes in. Not every college needs them. So that means you can submit them, but the admissions reps will be really honest with you. Some of them will say, you can submit them and we'll take them into consideration, even though you don't need them. And some will say, you can submit them, but we're not going to look at them. So regardless of anything, your student's counselor will write a letter, and that will go with their admissions package to the university. But as far as other letters of recommendation, it's really important to look and see if the school requires them. Some schools will also limit how many you can upload. So if you have like 3 or 4 recommenders on Naviance and or Common App, which we will get to Naviance in a little bit, you have to make sure that you're sending the letters to the school that you want to send them to. The counselor's letter will always go, but then you can choose the recommender and which school they go to. So letters of recommendation is really important, and sometimes you want a certain recommender to send to a certain school because of the program the student is applying to. So just be aware of how the school's admissions teams are using those letters in their admissions process. And you can do that through research. You can do that through connecting with the admissions department at that university or college, and they're really open about that. So that's letters of recommendation. Students, we tend to tell students, they have their counselor letter, but then they should get at least one from a main subject. And then after that, students can ask the coach, students can ask an elective, but really if universities require them, they'd really like to see a letter from a main subject teacher. Next is standardized tests. So there is a question in the box about what trends towards standardized tests. So it's split a lot, and I can't enforce as much, like a lot of schools are going test optional. And what that means is, so for those of you who don't know what test optional means, it means that the students who apply to that school do not need to submit either ACTs or SATs to the admissions office, and they can be reviewed just like any other student for admission to that school. So I have talked to many reps, and I was actually just at a conference yesterday, and every admissions rep that I've spoken to, when they say test optional, they truly mean test optional. So no one is at a disadvantage if they do not submit test scores. What they did say about the test scores is that if a student would like to submit them because it enhances them or showcases their ability to take the test because they got a high score, then by all means, submit them. But if they are on the fence about submitting them, or they don't know if it would enhance their application, then they said leave them out. So the question remains, you know, what is a good test score to submit and what is that middle 50%? So colleges, again, this is like the research part of it where you have to reach out to the admissions office, but colleges have that middle 50% range. But what they will tell you is, and then sometimes that helps, sometimes that doesn't, because sometimes the student is close to that middle 50% range and you're not sure if they should submit. But what they will tell you is that most admissions reps that I have spoken to, at least 50% of their the class they admitted submitted without test scores and still got admitted. So, and I said that's at least 50. So in some colleges, in some instances that I've talked to, they say 70% of their class that they admitted did not submit test scores. So that's really the trend right now where it's going. A lot of the colleges have said that they're keeping test optional indefinitely. Some said they're keeping it at least for the next 3 to 4 years. So I think more time will tell. A lot of the colleges, so I was at the University of Connecticut yesterday. They said that they're doing a whole research project on their students to see how successful, you know, the trends are with or without test scores. So I think there's more to come on that, but that's where the trend is right now. Does that answer the question about standardized tests? Okay, I'll keep checking the box, but that's, or are there any other questions? Did that spark any other questions about standardized tests? I see there's someone who raised their hand. If you could type in the chat box, in the question and answer box, I can answer your question. I see there's 2 people who raised their hand. So if you can just chat in the Q&A box, that would be helpful. But I'm glad that answered your question about standardized tests. So, you know, we're seeing some positive things coming out of, you know, test optional schools. Can I just, okay, so the question was, can I just sum it up again about test scores? Yeah, like most schools right now, a lot of schools are test optional. So that's really the trend we're seeing right now. A lot of schools, when they say test optional, they really mean it. One caveat to that, actually, let me add, one caveat to that is some schools will say they're test optional, but then depending on what program your student is applying to, they may need test scores. So something that we are seeing that with in some programs in some colleges, if a student is applying to nursing or engineering, they may require test scores. So again, that's like research on your school when you're looking at the admissions requirements to just make sure that the school, if the school is test optional, does that mean for all programs and majors? And the other trend actually, and I'll mention right now, the other trend that we're seeing right now too is some schools are saying they're test blind, meaning they won't even take test scores. So that's another thing. So the student doesn't even have the option to submit a test score. So that's the other trend we're seeing currently. So the other question is it important to give SAT, and what are good scores currently? So good question. I would say, it really depends. And that's like the hard part about this. It really depends on the school. It depends on the student. It depends on their whole application. So while schools are test optional, if you feel and your student feels that the SAT and or ACT enhances their ability to show the admissions office that they can do work at a high level, then I would say submit it. But I don't believe it is hurting the students in not submitting SAT, ACT scores. And if you talk to admissions reps, they are saying that right out of their mouth. They don't care if they are truly a test optional school. They don't care if you're submitting test scores or not. As they put it, it's just one less thing that they're looking at when it comes to a holistic review of the application. And the second part of that question is, what are good scores currently? That's a hard question to answer because it's very dependent on what schools you're applying to. So like I said before, that middle 50% range that the schools give, when they say you should submit, this is the middle 50% range. If you were going to submit, every school has a different middle 50% range. So I would say if you're looking, when your student is trying to take the exam, if you're looking for a score to kind of hit, try to see if you have the list of colleges and kind of do some research prior, because they'll share with you what the middle 50% range is. So I would just try to, work on that prior to taking the exam. Does that make sense? Someone asked, is there a list compiled for test optional schools? That's a really, really, really good question. As of right now, no. Just because everything in college admissions is so fluid and ever changing. So test optional, more and more schools are jumping on board. So we do not have a comprehensive list currently of test optional schools. So the next question is more a statement. I think it's helpful to say that merit is automatically given for high scores. A lot of colleges will give money for high scores. So if you have a high performance kid, take the test. So yes, so in some instances, merit scholarships are based. So this kind of circles back to our conversation last week. In some instances, merit is based on merit scholarships rather are based on test scores, but in some instances they are not. So again, if the school is truly test optional, and again, the admissions office will tell you, their merit scholarships sometimes are not based on test scores. So just make sure you're really talking to the admissions office and getting the direct information from the admissions office, because they're best to tell you, what you qualify for and how you should apply. Sorry, I'm just reading the next question. So if you ask the question about Naviance and the range in Naviance, can you just reword that question? I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. The other question, good question, are there any schools that absolutely require SAT or ACT scores, and how can we identify which schools these are? So again, really good question. You can identify the schools, so that's part of that research piece of the schools. So when you're looking and compiling a list, schools are very forthcoming if they require the SAT or ACT, and there are some schools out there that still do. So when you go on the admissions website, a lot of them will have first-year applicants. You can go down and they will all list the admissions requirements. So it's part of that like organizational spreadsheet. It's part of that research. They will list what you need to apply. And like I said, those admissions websites will also list, you know, if they're test optional, if certain majors and programs need that, need the test scores. I hope that answered that question. There's a question about SAT prep classes offered at Schreiber. Students should check in with their counselors and they can kind of go over all of that if they're interested in SAT prep. Okay, so I think we've kind of spoken about SAT, ACT a lot. Does that kind of sum up the SAT, ACT part of the application? Also, for those of you who don't know, if you are submitting SAT, ACT scores, they need to come directly from College Board to the college or the ACT. You know, you can self-report them, but in order for colleges to look at them, they will need to directly come from the College Board or ACT. Okay. So with that, grades. So talking about grades, another trend that we have been seeing, and that is helpful for you to know, is the school an SRAR school? So for those of you who don't know what SRAR stands for, it's the self-reporting grading system. So we are seeing a trend in a lot of the bigger universities using the SRAR. So it's an additional step for your students when applying, and until they fill out the SRAR, they will not be considered for admission. So the student will fill out the entire Common App, the demographics, all of those things, you know, upload the letter, put the letters of recommendations, the recommenders in, the personal essay, the supplements, all of those things. They'll press submit, and if the school is an SRAR school, the school will reach out to the student. So it's important that your student checks their emails in the days after they submit a application, because the school will tell the student if they need to fill out the SRAR. And all that is, the student can take a copy of their unofficial transcript, sit with it, and they just have to input the classes and the grades, and then press submit. And the schools will, a lot of the schools are admitting off the SRAR. And then all they would want is a final transcript at the end of the year to ensure that all of that was correct. So that we have seen that more often this year, and that's just an additional step in the application cycle. A lot of students will think once they hit submit for the Common App, you know, they're done, but the SRAR is an additional step after. It is also our understanding once the student fills out the SRAR and they apply to multiple SRAR schools, if they filled it out once, they're good. The question is, should we be sending official AP scores? So you can send official AP scores to the colleges. So that also would come directly from College Board. And in those instances, depending on the admissions requirements for the school, sometimes the student can get credit from the admissions office for certain either courses at the university or just credit in general to go towards their degree requirements. Okay, so this is a really, really good question. Is it better to decide on a major and then search for the best college that's affordable? Or is it better to get into a top school and make do with the major? So that's a really, really, really good question. And it depends, right? So it depends on the student's values, the student views regarding that. I always say that if a student absolutely knows what they want to do, they should look for schools that have that major. The programs are really important, and depending on what students want to do after college, you know, the major is pretty important. So if a student says, you know, they know, I don't know, just giving an example, they know they want to go to law school. Well, they can major in undergrad in a lot of different things. They can major in English, they can major in political science, they can really major in anything and then sit and take the LSAT at the end and go to law school. So on that sense, if you'd rather search for the school and make do with whatever major, then I think that's, what you do. But if you are planning or your student is planning to be like a nurse or an engineer, something that they can practice as soon as they get out of undergrad, I always tell students to search for the program and obviously a college that is affordable, and go where the college is affordable and it has a really good program. The one thing I will caution with that is, our students are making these decisions at 17, 18 years old. And we see the trend in college that a lot of students change majors. So if a student isn't absolutely sure, I would just make sure you could still look for the program, but make sure that that college or university has a lot of options if the student were to want to change majors. So I hope that kind of answers the question. So back to the SAT, PSAT, are you seeing a trend this year in kids in not taking the SAT, PSAT? My son, PSAT 10th grade, and not a lot of kids took it. So what I would say about that is it's really, for students right now, it's really a personal decision. I would say if a student can sit for it, there's no harm in sitting for it. So that way all of the options are open. But some students feel that, the next couple of years where they are looking to go to school, they're guaranteeing that the admissions office is saying that it's going to be test optional and they're okay with that. So it's really a personal choice. I mean, we say if every student, if they can and they're willing to sit for it, they should probably just sit for it. But if a student is really against it or knows they're going to a school, without that they're promising is going to be test optional, then it's okay. I think that's a new trend, and that's really kind of hard to comment on right now. So we're telling students to still sit for them if they can. So if I understand this question correctly, this has to do with EAED, which we're just kind of closing the chapter on. Like I said, November 15th is really the last kind of day for EAED, unless it's ED2. If a school is single choice EA, you cannot ED to another school. So I'm assuming you're talking about like restricted EA, which we don't see a lot of. But yeah, that is correct. So if I understand what the question is asking, if it's a restricted EA, no, you cannot apply ED to another school. The only thing with restricted EA is in the sense that you can't apply to another school like ED, that when you get the admissions letter, you're not committed to go like you are ED. But if it's restricted EA, yeah, you can't apply ED to another school. Okay. So just circling back, because we're just about out of time. And I know, I'm sorry, I didn't get to some of the questions, but these were all really, really great questions. But I think I covered, are there any last minute things that I touched upon already that needs clarification before we go? So yeah, circling back to the majors. So someone wrote, my child is undecided on a major minor as a junior. Is it beneficial to look at schools with strong liberal arts programs? I would say yes. And not even just strong liberal arts, just schools with lots of different choices and lots of different majors. So when they are there, they can, one, explore a lot of different majors and options, but two, they can also have the option to change into whatever major they want, without having to transfer schools. So yeah, that's a really good question for our students who are going in undecided. Also, it's completely normal. I just want to normalize also that it's completely normal for students to go in undecided, but you just want to be strategic with the schools you choose so that way they have options when they get to those schools. I hope that answered the question. Okay. So we're just about out of time, but I am going to answer this last one. It was, how do I see some of the previous college application meetings? Are there recordings? Yes, all the recordings are on the Schreiber guidance page. So the drop-down menu on the right-hand side will have college and career chat recordings. You can click that and all of the previous recordings are there. And we're hoping to get this one up by the end of the week. So, yes, so they do live somewhere. All right. Thank you everyone for joining us today. The next college and career chat will be how to prepare for the Choose Your Future fair that we're having here in December. And that one is at the end of November. So I hope to see you there, but thank you for being a great group this morning. Have a great day.